The Israeli military says it's concluded an investigation absolving its forces of committing any crimes during the 3-week assault on the Gaza Strip beginning late last year. Israeli military Deputy Chief of Staff General Dan Harel said Israel's lone mistakes came down to intelligence and operational errors.
We found out that the IDF operated under the international law and according to a very high standard of professionalism and moral standards. Saying that, we found out several mistakes, intelligence and operational mistakes we made, and we are dealing with them.
Israel killed more than 1,300 Palestinians during the Gaza attack, most of them women and children. It bombed crowded civilian areas, ambulances, aid compounds, UN facilities, mosques, and several schools. Hamas spokesperson Ayman Taha dismissed the Israeli investigation as a sham.
This is a mockery of all the crimes that have been committed against our people. And the reason that the Israeli army cannot consider what has happened in the Gaza Strip as criminal is because the criminal himself cannot also be the judge. Therefore, these findings of Israeli army innocence are unreliable. The crimes that have been committed are crystal clear.
The Israeli probe comes ahead of a UN investigation headed by former international prosecutor Richard Goldstone. Bill van Esveld of Human Rights Watch called the IDF move a preliminary reaction to the UN's anticipated findings.
This appears to be a whitewash investigation that is happening just before the Goldstone investigation mandated by the United Nations. And it seems to prove the point that Human Rights Watch has been making all along, which is that there needs to be an independent and impartial United Nations investigation into these allegations of laws of war violations, because the IDF has not lived up to the job.
In other news from Israel and the occupied territories, Israel's defied U.S. warnings and demolished another Palestinian home in East Jerusalem. The Obama administration's few mild criticisms of Israel have centered around destroying houses on Palestinian land. The home belonged to the Houdidan family, which includes 7 children. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has renewed U.S. vows to boycott the Palestinian government unless Hamas meets U.S.-Israeli demands. Clinton testified Wednesday before the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
We will not deal with nor in any way fund a Palestinian government that includes Hamas unless and until Hamas has renounced violence, recognized Israel, and agreed to follow the previous obligations of the Palestinian Authority. And that is our policy, and that is exactly what is guiding us. But we want to leave open the door that can happen.
The policy of opening the door to Hamas's acceptance marks a slight rhetorical deviation from Bush administration policy, which unequivocally rejected any dealings with Hamas. But it continues the Bush policy of imposing conditions on Palestinians not imposed on Israel. Israel's long refused to renounce violence, recognize Palestine, or agree to uphold prior agreements. In response to Clinton's comments, Hamas spokesperson Osama Hamdan said, quote, Hillary Clinton must understand there is a Palestinian democracy and there were Palestinian elections. This week, Cheney called for the release of documents that could prove what he called the success of the Bush administration's torture methods in gaining new intelligence. In Colombia, a new report says the number of internally displaced people continued to rise last year. Jorge Rojas of Colombia's Human Rights and Displacement Council attributed most of the displacements to right-wing Colombian paramilitaries.
It's an unfortunate figure for us because it shows an increasing tendency. It shows that a number of displaced people in Colombia is still growing due to the armed conflict, human rights violations, and infractions against human rights. Last year, we registered a displacement of about 380,000 people. This shows a 24% increase compared to the year before.
Colombia has the world's second-largest internally displaced population. In Sudan, most of the refugees are indigenous peasant workers or Afro-Colombians. Bolivian President Evo Morales addressed the UN General Assembly Wednesday. In a speech marking International Earth Day, Morales criticized former President George W. Bush for supporting a failed coup plot against him last year. He also addressed the controversy surrounding last week's Bolivian police killing of 3 people in an alleged assassination plot against him. Morales also discussed the World Bank, which he said is no longer trying to impose privatization as a condition for loans.
Antes en Bolivia, el Banco Mundial ponía condiciones para que Bolivia pueda acceder a créditos.
Before, the World Bank used to impose conditions on Bolivia in order for us to have access to loans. In the first year of my government, some World Bank representatives came to Bolivia and tried to blackmail me.
Chantajearme. No, yo dije.
And I said, okay, if it's unconditional help, fine. But if it's conditioned on the privatization of basic services, on the privatization of our natural resources, then no.
Morales went on to call for adding new text to the UN resolution establishing Earth Day, saying it should affirm the right of ecosystems, plants, or animals to exist without threat of irresponsible human acts. A Venezuelan opposition leader is seeking asylum in Peru over what he calls political persecution at home. Manuel Rosales is in the Peruvian capital of Lima, where government officials say they're examining his asylum request. On Wednesday, a Venezuelan judge ordered Rosales' arrest on corruption charges. In South Africa, tens of millions of people voted Wednesday in national elections. The ruling African National Congress is leading initial returns. ANC leader Jacob Zuma is poised to become president, overcoming recent controversies that have included allegations of rape and corruption. And back in the United States, the auto giant General Motors is reportedly planning on closing most of its U.S. factories for up to 9 weeks this summer. GM faces a June 1st deadline to qualify for additional government loans on top of the more than $13 billion it's already received. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report.